Hailing frequencies open and welcome aboard Treks and Tangents. I'm your co-host Brian.
And I'm your co-host Jackie. I'm the Star Trek newbie who treks off on tangents.
And I'm your Star Trek expert who is here to get the tangents back on track. Each episode we watch and talk about a different Star Trek episode, and this week we watched
Star Trek, the original series, Season 1, Episode 12, The Menagerie, Part 2.
Welcome back to the second part of this two-part episode break in Star Trek.
Exciting.
The first two-part episode. Thank you everyone who is sharing the podcast with their friends. Thank you for everyone who is commenting and reviewing the podcast wherever you choose to consume the podcast. It certainly helps with our engagement. It makes it more fun to do this.
Yes, hearing back, feedback and all kinds of positive or, what we can do to improve. That's always fun to know.
Yes, but with all of that out of the way, let's just jump on into it. And we'll pick up this plot with the Turbolift tease from last week. Normally that's where we give Jaci the title of the episode, and Jaci will try to guess the plot of this week's episode. But since it was a two-part episode, and since the plot was pretty obvious as to what we were going to be watching, we changed it up a little bit. We did a two-part Turbolift tease. The first Turbolift tease question, we asked Jaci to guess or predict what the big reveal was going to be at the end of the episode, the big surprise. So with that being said, computer, what was Jaci's guess to what the big surprise and big reveal was going to be at the end of the episode?
Jaci stated last week, "Okay, well, I would assume that the Talosian people are a given, so the twist is going to have to be they have taken over Spock's body and are using it, just like you said, to infiltrate."
So Jaci, how accurate do you think your guess was from last week?
I was fairly close, but I went in the wrong direction.
I think you started to go down that route. Spoiler, this is going to be a more of a thought exercise episode and less of a plot-centric heavy episode. So when I phrased or wrote the Turbolift tease last week in reference to the big spoiler, obviously what I was referring to was the fact that Commodore Mendez on the shuttlecraft and during the court-martial wasn't the real Commodore. They were a projection or an illusion from the big brain people, the Talosians. So you went an interesting route where you kind of leaped onto that idea of the Talosians using their powers to simulate someone from a higher rank within Starfleet to do their bidding and to push their motives. But you went with Spock and not the Commodore, so.
Well, I was just, assuming since Spock was in trouble and pushing his narrative that he was the one it would be focused on.
And I think that's why it makes it a surprise or a big reveal, is because Commodore Mendez is almost a background character. He's there to push the plot along, and then to make him this focal point, I think really makes it an effective gotcha moment at the end of the episode.
And it totally did get me, because the Talosians are totally playing each other off of Mendez's ideas. Like, he's the one pushing back, and Kirk is like, no, let's keep going. Like, he's actually there. They fooled me big time.
Right. So the second part of the Turbolift tease, again, we'll just make it a two-part guess since it's a two-part episode. I asked Jaci to predict what in the replaying or the retelling of the plot of The Cage, there was one part that they changed that maybe not significantly, but to a degree changes the outcome and the overall plot of The Cage. And so I asked Jaci to predict what that was. So, computer, what was Jaci's guess to that?
Jaci stated, maybe Captain Pike is their god, or Vina is going to have a humongous head as well, but they made her pretty. She is still going to have her same beautiful blue eyes, though.
So, Jaci, what do you think of your guess to this portion of the Turbolift tease?
Well, I'm kind of like 10% right, but I really big time failed though.
I think the only thing that we could say you're 10% right was the Talosians thinking that Captain Pike is their god, in the sense that the Talosians would even have any kind of motivation to care enough about Pike to offer to let him back to Talos 4 in order to let him live out his life.
Well, I agree with you on that. And I think that if they have the capacity for caring instead of just, research, when we reach back to the original cage, we saw them have like a interaction where they both began to understand each other and how to communicate effectively without just like nitpicking everything. His actions surprised the Talosians when they assumed they knew everything.
Yeah, so then following that narrative plot, I guess we'll just give our initial impressions of the episode at this point and move away from the turbolift keys.
Sorry.
This is going to be a big episode of tangents anyway, so it's okay.
My kind of show.
On that plot point, yes, we have to assume that the Talosians' motivation for all of this, the events of the Menagerie, is that they have somehow learned that Captain Pike has suffered this terrible accident, and they have to have some lasting impact impression of Captain Pike from their encounter with him during the events of the Cage 13 years prior, where after their attempt to enslave and use Captain Pike and other members of the Enterprise and Vina to create a new civilization of slave labor, yes, they are now impressed with Captain Pike, his actions. Maybe they're even impressed with his self-sacrifice that led to his injury. Certainly also, I would imagine, motivated. Vina has now spent another 13 years in isolation without anyone of substance. I'm sure she has imaginary friends that the Talosians are creating out of her imagination, but no one real.
Right.
So they have to have some motivation as well to give some kind of companionship to Vina.
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of like Snow White in her own way. All of her friends are little characters, but not animals like in Snow White.
Right. And on that metaphor, she doesn't have 7 dwarves. She has big-headed Talosians, maybe 3. I think we talked about it back in our coverage of the Cage, whether there are only 3, because we only see 3 on screen, if there's more and we just don't see more of them. But yeah, in any case, what did you think of this episode overall?
Overall, I really liked it more than the part 1. I think I liked it more because I understood more of the Cage, because I totally didn't get it at the beginning when we first were going over it. And now that I could put more of my knowledge into what we're watching and then twist around all the current Spock Kirk relationship that we've seen, now I think that's why I understood it and appreciated it more, because nothing was like superficial. There was lots of deep layers.
I liked this episode as well, much in the same way that I enjoyed the part 1 of the Menagerie. Again, coming into it with the mindset and the perspective of the Cage was not something that had been aired in 1966. So the people watching the Menagerie are not familiar with the plot point to the Cage, hadn't just seen the footage. So it's not truly a rerun show. Certainly this would not be enjoyable if the Cage had just aired
last week,
2.5 months ago, same season, and people are now tuning back in and going, why are we rewatching this entire episode? So again, it is entertaining. It does give the Cage more context. One might argue that if you take that context away, this is a slightly more boring episode because there isn't as much of that context of the court-martial. It is very much a lot more re-showing and retelling of the events of the Cage. It certainly made preparing for this episode of the podcast for me a lot easier because I could skip through a lot of it. But
exactly. No, I completely agree with you.
But it's still enjoyable, I think.
Yes.
And it certainly leads to some interesting thought exercises regarding the Talosians and how all of that plays out, but I think we'll cover that as we get into the episode a little bit more.
Sounds good.
And with that, Jackie, why don't you walk us through the episode?
So we open up the episode with Kirk writing like a personal log. It's not like his normal records, but more like a journal entry. How he's just reflecting on what's happened during the day. That Spock could be his bestie. He is throwing himself under the bus, getting this court martial. He is okay with being charged with mutiny, with kidnapping, with, I mean, you name it, the possibility of death for even going to Talos 4. But he is trying to also, like, give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, there has to be a reason because Spock is this logical being. So why would we be going there for no reason?
Yeah, I'll sidetrack it by saying, yes, this is a cold opening that is designed solely to remind the viewer what they watched a week ago and what we're coming back into. Done very awkwardly in a level that feels like some kind of high school drama department where they're doing these very strange camera shots where it's not a pure narrative. It is characters staring off into space, reciting lines. Very awkward.
Yeah, it's like they just have to move their eyes just a bit more and they'd be staring at us.
Yeah, I don't think this one lands. I'll give them credit. They could have very easily have just reused footage from part 1 of the Menagerie. I know we keep retelling and repeating the names of the episodes. I'm trying to keep us on track between what is the Menagerie and what is the cage.
I think if for the second part, the producer's production, all of that put in the original work and from part 1, then there wouldn't really be anything for the actors to be doing for part 2. Like they're just sitting there waiting for their last 30 minutes of work.
Oh, true. The acting work of Spock, Kirk, Commodore Mendez, all of that heavy lifting in this episode.
Hey, and Captain Pike.
No,
He did a great job.
Yes, with his blinking. All of that heavy acting for them definitely comes at the very end of the episode.
Yes.
So yeah, I'll give them credit that they didn't go the normal route of just re-showing footage from the Menagerie Part 1 to catch the viewer back up to speed. I don't think it lands very well. I think they could have refilmed some of those scenes, but that's just me.
So then we go to the opening credits, which I always fall in love with because those beautiful horn sections. But back to reality on the starship. So the court martial reconvenes. Everybody, Kirk, Mendez, Pike, and Mr. Spock are in their office.
Yeah, and I'll point out of note that in part 1, before it is revealed that these historical records are in fact just transmissions from Talos 4, illusions created by the Talosians, there's quite a few number of crew members in the court-martial proceedings. There's security personnel, there's a stenographer, I assume she's a stenographer, there's other Enterprise crew members operating the screen. Now that we've reconvened and now that we have the knowledge that this is, in fact, forbidden transmissions from Talos 4, there's no one else in the court-martial proceedings extra.
You're right, because Robbie turned on the screen last episode.
Correct. So now it is just Kirk, Commodore Mendez, Pike as the judges, the panel, and Spock, the accused. There's no one else in there to witness these forbidden transmissions. So a significant change. Credit to the writers to recognize that what they're setting down for story.
So again, Mendez tells Spock, we ordered no contact with Talos 4. This is still happening. Why can't we just finish this up? And this is when we actually learn that the keeper from the cage, the like quote unquote zookeeper, is the one sending the transmissions and throwing them up on the screen. How? I don't know, but Spock refers to him as the keeper, and also the keeper is well aware of Captain Pike's condition, like his health. It's mentioned multiple times.
Yeah, so then leading to the motivation of the Talosians to do all of this, they're fully aware that they are trying to entice, lure, invite an injured, unhealthy Captain Pike, not the healthy, vivacious Pike that they last saw 13 years ago. Also of note, yes, the members there weren't in control of the view screen. They don't get to call up or even choose when the view screen turns on or off. The Talosians have full control of that. I guess when the crew member earlier in the first part turned on the view screen, it was the Talosians giving that appearance.
Like magic.
Like magic. To keep up the subterfuge. So the court-martial proceeding resumes. The Talosians, or the Keeper, begin showing the events from the cage on the view screen to the court-martial proceedings. We get a flashback, as I'm referring to it, of Pike waking up in his glass cell after he's been kidnapped on the surface of Talos 4. The Talosians come down the elevator, they introduce themselves, kind of give some kind of introduction to why they're there, but the majority of this flashback is to focus on Pike's encounter on Rigel 7 with the monster, the Kalar, his introduction to Vina, fighting and killing that alien, establishing this idea that the Talosians have the ability to make Pike experience alternate realities or illusions, and the fact that Vina is there. It's the best way to describe it.
Well, she's the damsel in distress.
Exactly.
And then the screen shuts off, and even Mendez is like, what's happening? But we notice that Captain Pike's head has slumped over. He's not as alert as he usually is for how he is at the moment. And the Talosians are aware that he is very fatigued and he needs to take a break, or at least rest for the rest of the day and reconvene when it's a better time for him.
Right, which establishes the idea that, again, reinforcing the Talosians have empathy for Captain Pike. Again, if the Talosians get to choose and control the view screen and when to start and when to stop, and they have the ability to know in this moment that Pike is fatigued. They're not just beaming their thoughts to the view screen. They have the ability to be aware of what is taking place in this court-martial.
Like a Talosian spy fly on the wall.
Right.
Spy fly.
So, yeah, don't know if they have that ability to know what's going on in the room because Commodore Mendez, as we all know from watching the episode, is in fact just a projection, an illusion created by the Talosians. If they're seeing what's going on through his eyes, or if they have this omnipotent presence to know what's going on, even without Commodore Mendez in the room. I would argue that they do have this omnipotent presence to understand, and they don't have the need to create illusion spies, which just makes them even more powerful and even more dangerous.
Extremely scary.
Because again, it's not addressed in the episode. How did they find out about Pike's injury? How did they find out that Pike was so unwell? To then pull on their emotional heartstrings to orchestrate and cause this series of events to start where Spock is trying to get Pike back to Talos 4.
And even the heartstring of the most logical, inhuman being that they can find. Like, he's half human, but he submerges it, you know? Like a weak point.
Yeah, certainly. Well, they motivate Spock to get him to do what he does because they're relying on his loyalty to Captain Pike. That's been established in the first episode, that Spock is incredibly loyal to Captain Pike to want to risk all of this.
Almost definitely.
But it also, again, causes the question of how did the Talosians, after they learned of Pike's injury, after they've decided to try to put this plan into motion, how did they ever get in contact with Spock? They didn't send out traditional communications. They didn't actually hail him because there's no record of that taking place. So they had to use their illusionary powers to reach out to Spock across the vast distance of space to communicate to Spock all that transpired on Talos 4, which Spock knows, but to remind Spock, hey, we're here. Captain Pike is now not living the best life. How about you bring him back to Talos 4 and we can at least provide a better life for him? They had to have done that with their illusionary powers. They had to do that with some kind of telepathic communication. Why in the time frame from the cage to the menagerie in those 13 years have the Talosians never done anything like that? What caused their restraint?
That's exactly what Mendez asks of Spock. But Spock refuses to answer, saying we have to keep watching the transmission and we'll know more when we arrive at Talos 4.
And very, like you mentioned, interesting that Commodore Mendez acts as the pushback, as
Right?
the character to argue against these normal proceedings and be the one to argue and push back against watching the view screen and the recap of the events of the cage when he in fact is just the Talosians. But we get our first commercial break. We come back from that commercial break with not a lot of continuing plot points. We get a brief captain's log from Kirk announcing that the court-martial is reconvening. Pike has had time to rest and recoup. The Talosians turn back on the view screen. We get flashbacks of Vina's first interaction with Pike after the events of Rigel 7 and that fight and being saved by Captain Pike. Vina explained that she is there to be a companion to Pike. She's there to please him because this is what the Talosians want her to do, because the Talosians' ultimate goal is for Pike and Vina to reproduce and start this new race of slave labor. We also get the very prolonged scene of when the Enterprise crew beam down the giant laser and use that giant laser as a focal point for the Enterprise's energy to try to bust through the door, which in the moment it is shown that it is not successful, even though we know it is. And it's just, again, the Talosians creating an illusion to manipulate people into seeing and doing what they want to do.
I must admit, my mouth did drop because I didn't realize that's what happened the first time we watched. I was like, whoa. I liked watching everything with a new point of view.
Yeah. Again, the Menagerie provides the missing context to the cage to make it an entertaining piece of television. We get a very brief cut back to the Commodore to draw the conclusion that Pike was captured as breeding stock. Pike confirms it. This is just to serve as acknowledgement to the viewer's own thoughts that this is in fact what is going on. It's to tie the cage and the Menagerie together because, again, they can't go back and reshoot any of the scenes from the cage. So just confirmation to the viewer, this is what is happening. We get more flashbacks. We get my favorite scene from the cage where Pike refuses to eat the food and the nutrients that is provided to him. The Talosians then tell him a hunger strike is not going to work. We will just punish you for a hunger strike. We will not only force feed you, but we will create unpleasant illusions for you to experience. And we get that fantastic scene shot of Pike in literal hell and the Talosians commenting that they pulled that scene from his brain, from his theology. Fantastic scene, in my opinion. We also get, I think Jaci will confirm, her favorite scene where the Talosians transport Pike and Vina to a picnic on
Yes.
Earth, because we have the horse.
Well, two of them, because they're having a picnic under the trees with both of his horses, and I already forgot his horse's name, but because this is his memory, and his horse, he's like petting it and saying, "Hi, baby, nice to see you again." And his horse is nudging his pocket. I don't have any sugar, and then magically there's sugar in his pocket, so he can give it to his horse.
Right.
And Vina, who is, she's trying to be any kind of these perfect ladies that he will finally settle down for. And she even asks him, "What do you want? I can be anything." And that reminded me of Pretty Woman.
Yeah. Do you happen to remember where on Earth the picnic takes place?
I should remember. It's on the tip of my tongue.
It was the Mojave Desert. Even though it's all green and lush, it's to show that Earth and humans and Starfleet have terraforming capabilities, so they've transformed the Mojave Desert into that rich green scenery. It also, again, is the only time that we spend any kind of scene on Earth in the original series.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And even then, it's
Interesting.
just a illusion of Earth and not actually on Earth.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. We get other examples of Earth in the original series, like we had the duplicate Earth in Miri, but they never actually go back to original Earth
Oh.
in these 3 seasons. But of course, at the picnic scene, we get the dialogue between Pike and Vina, where Vina starts to go the opposite direction and say, well, if this version of me is not going to entice you to just give up and submit to what the Talosians want, then maybe I will create this illusion where you don't have to be all prim and proper. You don't have to be in charge. You can live a more
Non-vanilla.
non-vanilla, more
Exciting
life. We get the transition to the Orion slave trader palace, where Pike is put into the role of that slave trader. Vina is now the green-skinned Orion dancing girl with the mostly green body makeup.
I feel so bad for her. She's so blotchy.
Yeah, when it's been remastered for modern day viewing, definitely you can see where some of the paint has started to wear off. But again, they were just filming a pilot. They were just trying to get the episode approved and so that the show could happen. But it's also, I think I mentioned it, it's awkward because there's just very prolonged scenes of Pike and his 2 illusion companions complimenting him, but just staring at Vina and Vina's attempts to seduce Pike. But now we get the added bonus where we have Kirk and Commodore Mendez and Spock. We have the real Pike, or I should say the modern current Pike. We are now interposing scenes of them just staring at the view screen. We get an awkward comment from Commodore Mendez talking about how the Orion slave girls are supposed to be seductive women and irresistible. Again, for the benefit of the viewer, so that we understand the context as to why suddenly we see this woman slathered up in green paint and dancing around. Appreciate it. Also, just very awkward moments of quote unquote silence as they stare at her.
It's actually kind of gross how his companions are like those stereotypical creepy dude.
But again, this is the moment where the Talosians are trying different methods to
Make him happy.
make him happy. That's the context that we need as viewers, that this is just another attempt to break Captain Pike 13 years ago, to just get him to conform and to submit to the Talosians. In and amongst all of this, we get the confirmation to the viewers that we, modern viewers, already knew. Again, the Talosians motivation to all of this is they want Pike and Vina to reproduce, to have offspring, and to use them as the Adam and Eve to create a new society that the Talosians can enslave as manual labor to fix their machines, to reclaim the surface of their planet that the Talosians destroyed during nuclear war, and make them do all the work, because the Talosians, all of that knowledge for their technology, as well as, I assume, much of their ability to perform manual, grunt physical labor, has atrophied over the centuries, with them relying so much on their telepathic abilities.
Well, we never see them use their arms. They're always like clasped in front of them.
Yeah, I think the only time that we ever really see them do any kind of physical work is when they first subdue Captain Pike, all the way back at the beginning, when they use that little device to spray out that mustard cloud.
Oh, you're right.
And then they kind of, as Pike is unconscious or about to become unconscious, they kind of wrestle him into the elevator.
They have little baby T-Rex arms.
No, I think they have regular full-size arms. They're just scrawny. So,
yes.
But we get another commercial break in the middle of that flashback to Vina as the Orion slave girl. And when we come back from commercial break, we just get a very brief description from Kirk saying that Pike is being tempted. We get the flashback that goes through the end of the Orion dancing girl scene where Pike resists the temptation. He jumps up and he runs off from the palace scene. He goes behind a curtain. He ends up in this cave and it's kind of a dead end. He's looking for a way out. He's confused. He's disoriented. There's a brief moment where Vina, still in the green paint, appears in the cave and kind of confronts him as kind of a last-ditch effort on this whole tangent of a way to try to entice Pike to submit. Hard cut to the whole part of the Enterprise crew beaming down to try to rescue Pike again after they weren't able to cut through the elevator door with the laser. They're now targeting energy signals underground that they've been able to pick up, and they think they're beaming down to that. However, number one and the unnamed yeoman end up in the glass cage with Pike and Vina. Obviously, these energy signals were some kind of illusion that the Talosians were projecting to trap them. Again, they've realized that Vina's probably not going to succeed in seducing Pike, so let's get some other women down there to tempt him.
Women that he actually knows.
Correct. Again, another attempt to find a way to seduce Pike. I think if I remember correctly, again, I skipped through much of the retelling of the cage as I rewatched the Menagerie.
I'll help you.
When number one and Yeoman beam down and they end up trapped in that cage.
Yes.
Don't they beam down with other people? Don't they beam down with...
They were supposed to go with 4 other men with the landing party, but on Enterprise, only those 2 beam down, and the people running the machine go, "No women!" And then we're back into the glass cage where number one and our poor haircutted yeoman has arrived.
Right.
And Vina's very angry.
Vina's very angry because they're taking away her job, basically. I think at this point, Vina is not infatuated or in love with Pike. I don't think that happens until the very end of the cage. So I think Vina is just upset or scared that she'll be punished for failing in her duty.
Yes.
But back to my original thing, when number one and Yeoman beam down and they get trapped and the men don't beam down, obviously this is manipulation by the Talosians. It shows that they have control over technology, which we knew and all of that. Why didn't the Talosians beam down the men and trap the men as well as more of an example?
I think the answer to that is from the very beginning, Vina only called Pike a prime specimen, a man of beauty, superiority, pretty much, prime steak, and everybody else was just chuck.
Okay.
I mean, think of it. In this scenario, Pike is supposed to be strong, intelligent, compassionate. Also, the ability to lead. He's not easily to bend. He's very logical. All these things, bronze and beauty, wrapped up into one. Where the others, I'm sure, share the same capacity, but she did not see them as being as quality, quote unquote, animal.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems to reach a point where the Talosians had other options at their disposal
And refused to use them.
and refused to use them. So you have other male specimens that may be less suitable, but still able to reproduce with women to create this slave culture of slave labor. Do you really need them to be prime examples? Wouldn't you need more than Adam and Eve to avoid inbreeding? The Talosians would maybe know about inbreeding.
I completely agree with that thought process, but perhaps they didn't choose the other gentleman because Pike knew too much. Like they couldn't back up because then they have to start the process all over again. And then we have a wandering person around space knowing all their secrets.
You just kill him. You just kill Pike.
Not the prime specimen, beautiful person.
Well, then you just keep him imprisoned.
No, I totally get your point. That I didn't think about that either.
Just as a thought process, they have an entire ship full of people that they seem to have the ability. Well, I take it back. They don't seem to have the ability to cause them or force them to teleport, but they just have this example where they're willingly teleporting back and forth and they only choose to kidnap the women instead of diverting the men to their own cage. The only other explanation I can think of is there literally is only 3 Talosians left, and they don't have or they don't want to risk too many captives. Because if the prisoners outnumber the jailers, eventually the prisoners take over the jail.
Well, that makes sense also. Or they just thought it'd be really, really fun to just mess around and see what Pike would do. Does he save the pretty blonde chick who he just met? Does he pick his whoever number one is? Does he choose the tall brunette? Or what about the redheaded, the little gal? She's super petite. Like, what's he gonna do? Because the Talosians even say, I mean, they even break down each woman basically to what they can provide for him as a mate.
Right. Showing that they have, I mean, I think they've shown it before, but through telepathic abilities, they can read their thoughts and their minds, which leads to the whole subplot of how Pike is able to escape. We'll get to that in a bit. So
now we're back on the Enterprise in current time during the trial, and the transmission just stops. No reason why or anything. And Spock doesn't know why. Like, it just stopped. So Mendez demands, I'm done with this. I don't need to see anymore. We need to just reach a verdict. And Spock totally ignores what Mendez is doing and saying and goes straight to Captain Pike and is like asking him, do you want to go there? Should we wait and get to Talos? What do you want to do? Do you want to have a life like this? Or do you want to possibly get to Talos and be able to go back to Arizona and be whatever your dreams are, pretty much? But while they're talking, Kirk interrupts and says, why would he want to live like a zoo animal, like a specimen, a scientific experiment? Like, why would you want that to happen?
right, because up until this point, all that Kirk has seen of the events 13 years ago are the Talosians as
Bad
jailers and keeping Pike hostage. There's been no context at the end of the episode of how Pike escapes from the Talosians and so forth.
And even at this point, during the vote, Kirk is very much on the side of he's guilty of mutiny. Like, this is awful. Why would you do this?
Yeah, certainly from a standpoint viewing the letter of the law, viewing the court-martial, you have to disregard Spock's motivation. It is against Starfleet law to go to Talos 4 under any circumstances. I think the only thing that ends up saving Spock that we'll see here in a little bit is the fact that the Talosians chose, as part of their subterfuge, is to send these transmissions, these illusions that show the events from 13 years ago, not just to provide the context of why Spock is doing it to show his motivation, but the fact that it goes to others other than the Enterprise. It kind of makes the secret of Talos 4 out there, and ultimately I think that's what saves him. But in any case, it comes down to a vote. Pike and Mendez both vote Spock guilty. Kirk hesitates in a dramatic pause, in dramatic fashion, but Kirk ultimately votes guilty as well. Again, Spock is guilty. He has broken the law.
Why does Pike say yes to being guilty? Like, wouldn't he want to continue on with what the Talosians are trying to do? Or, again, is he just following the law?
I think Pike votes Spock as being guilty because that's all that you can do in a court-martial proceeding. Also, remember, contrary to normal proceedings, and it breaks the process of the court-martial a bit, Spock has pled guilty.
That's true.
Spock has admitted that he's broken the law. He takes responsibility for it. He's doing so in a way to show that maybe the law shouldn't apply in this circumstance. But ultimately, I think Pike votes that Spock is guilty because he is. And
makes sense.
He's not going to vote for Spock to not be guilty and ignore the law. He has to follow the law in his position as
an officer.
As an officer and part of the proceedings of the court-martial.
That makes sense.
But we get another commercial break. We come back from commercial. We get a report from the bridge to Mendez. Because keep in mind, back in the first part of the Menagerie, when it was revealed that Talos 4 was sending these transmissions and these communications out to the Enterprise, Starfleet had ordered that Captain Kirk be relieved of command of the Enterprise, and Mendez was in charge, and Mendez was charged to stop the Enterprise from reaching Talos 4, which he couldn't because it's under computer control. So that's why the report comes to Mendez and not Kirk, that they've entered into orbit around Talos 4. Spock then says that the computer would have released control of the Enterprise because it's finished its mission to reach Talos 4, but now the Talosians control the Enterprise. A little bit of a stretch. He tries to say that that's how it was 13 years ago. That wasn't entirely how it happened, but we'll give a little bit of narrative leeway to Mr. Spock in this circumstance. But we get, at this point, the rest of the flashbacks on the view screen from the Talosians.
This was very eye-opening for me because you know how I had such a hard time finishing my own plot summary of this. I was able to see it again and almost in like new light.
Yeah.
And it answered so many questions for me.
So very quickly, we resume at the point where Pike has blasted a hole into the glass cage opening. He's bluffed his way past the Talosians' bluff. They've gone back to the surface. They threaten to overload a phaser, if I remember correctly, that would kill everyone on the surface. The Talosians have recapped that they've gone through the Enterprise's computer. They recognize that humans are not good subjects to enslave. And this was the last chance for the Talosians at this ruse to create a race of slave labor. They've accepted their fate. They are going to become extinct. We get the moment where we show Vina's true appearance. She is horribly disfigured and scarred from her starship crashing 18 years prior, if I remember correctly. The Talosians were able to heal Vina, but they didn't know what she was supposed to look like, so they couldn't restore her physically. They could only restore her beauty and keep her beautiful through their illusionary powers. The Talosians let Pike and the away team and the Enterprise go with the promise that they will allow Vina to continue to exist in a form and live out her life in a way that would be most pleasing for her, with her beauty intact and so forth. And this is where we get the important distinction, the second part, all the way back to the Turboliftees, where I asked, what is the difference that they omitted in the Menagerie that slightly changes the plot of the Cage? We'll talk about it real quick, because we've gone on a lot of tangents and I'm looking at the time for the episode.
It's been fun.
In the Cage, in the original episode of the Cage that did not air, we get to see that not only do the Talosians promise to restore Vina's beauty, they create an illusion of Captain Pike to act as a companion for Vina. And we get to see Vina go back down the elevator to live with her illusionary companion, this mere perfect image of Captain Pike. In the Menagerie, they don't show that at this moment. So that does slightly change the whole plot of the Cage. Vina could have been alone, or at least had to exist only with very shallow companions for company, and not a full-blown companion of this illusion of Pike. She might have got to experience some things with Pike, but I believe, this is my belief, it would have all been surface level. She would not have been living out her life with Pike. She would have just got to have little touchstone moments with Pike, if anything. Basically, Vina for the last 13 years has been experiencing different illusions and not living a full life.
Well, all of her memories before the accident that led to her being on Talos 4, all of those memories, and then now she's remembering those with her sidekick. But, I mean, is he warm? Is there like a body? Does she have to cuddle with him at night? Or is it just literally like an imaginary friend, or like those little my buddy from like when we were kids, those little children?
Yeah, a doll.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of sad too.
Yeah, but this is where the flashback of the Cage ends, and this is where the heavy lifting for the remaining actors picks up for the rest of the episode.
Kirk realizes now that Pike going back to Talos 4, he will no longer be subjected to sit in this wheelchair as a vegetable and only using his brain to say yes or no, but he'd be able to live a full life of an unbroken body. He would be able to be with Vina, who he did say was gorgeous and that he was attracted to, and all these beautiful things while he was in the cage. He would be free, like a bird. And Kirk turns to Mendez and was about to say the same thing so excitedly, but Mendez, poof, he disappears. And we realize that Mendez was also an illusion.
Yeah.
He was never there, not even in the shuttlecraft.
Right. The Talosians communicate that to the remaining people. I believe at this point it's just Pike, Kirk, and Spock in the room. But yeah, communicates that they had created this illusion of Commodore Mendez from the moment that Kirk started to chase the Enterprise in the shuttlecraft. That was an illusion created by the Talosians.
Yeah, even the whole, we can't go too fast, we're just going to coast right here. That was them being creepy and sneaky.
Correct.
But Kirk still questions, like, we went through all of this. Why couldn't you just ask me? Like, we would have done whatever you needed to do to fulfill all of this. He's just confused. But Spock, he couldn't just say, this was my plan, because then he would be risking the death penalty for everybody. I mean, even though it does say in that file, whoever whoever comes near Talos 4, whether it's 1 or 500 on a ship, all of y'all are going to be in death penalty. So that was kind of weird to put in.
Yeah, again, I mentioned it last episode. The purpose of that general order is not to punish a single individual, not to be punitive for their decision. The whole point of that order is they're trying to keep the Talosians a secret. They're trying to prevent word of the Talosians and their illusionary powers from getting out into the universe. They obviously fear the Talosians being able to leave Talos 4 and create havoc, so they literally created the rule to silence anyone who gets knowledge of the Talosians. Presumably the only way they could do so would be to visit Talos 4, so they will kill everyone to keep that secret.
Literal silence.
Literal silence. I will also point out that, again, if the Talosians have the ability and the power to create messages and to talk to people like they did to Spock over the distance of space, why over the course of the 13 years didn't they try something similar? At which point everyone knows about the Talosians. It's an interesting thought.
True, but Pike wasn't injured until recently, right? So they didn't need to yet.
Right.
So, well, they are letting everything sink in to what's all happened. The real Commodore Mendez, who is still at Starbase 11, where they started, he sends a message to
The Enterprise.
the Enterprise, where Uhura receives it, and that same file that we were talking about, General Order 7, has been suspended, and that Captain Kirk can do as he wishes, but only for this one occasion.
Correct.
Like, it is still in place, but here you go for this one-time courtesy. So then Kirk goes to Pike and he asks him, of course, yes or no, do you want to accept this offer? Do you want us to take you to Talos 4, where you can be wherever your mind wants you to be? And he, you can't even finish the last word, and he's like pressing yes, like immediately, and long too. So there's those dashes.
Right. He could have used Morse code this whole time, folks.
And so Kirk happily asks Spock, please escort your former captain to the transporter room and let's get him down to Talos 4. Spock is very grateful for Kirk, I would presume, not only believing in him, but getting through this entire ordeal, like with faith. And thanks also him on Pike's behalf, since Pike can't say thank you. But then again, yes. And as they are, how they have like playing back and forth. I do love their relationship. As Spock is starting to roll Pike out, Kirk mentions, I don't know, you're kind of getting soft there. I don't know about these emotions you've been showing. And, he's being concerned about it. And Spock just says that don't be not insulting, and that he will just being logical the whole time as he rolls him out.
So Spock takes Pike out of the room to beam him down to the surface. It's immediate. There's no pause, but then the Talosians invite Kirk to view the view screen one final time. This is where we get that missing piece of footage from the cage where we see Vina fully restored to being beautiful at the end. And now we see Captain Pike also healthy and in his old uniform.
I love that touch.
So it's an illusion, but they go down the elevator to be together. This is what we would have seen in the beginning to show that Vina was now going to live a life with her illusionary companion of Pike so that they can be together. So this leads to the question. This is where the episode ends. So I'll
With
just
tears streaming down my face.
I'll leave it at that. I'll say end transmission so that we can jump into our final thoughts to the episode. What did you think, Jaci, of season 1, episode 12, The Menagerie Part 2?
Like I said, I was able to basically rewatch The Cage for a 14th time, but actually be able to see specific parts that I never understood. So that was great. I did think that there was a lot of The Cage, but then I also see I go off on my tangent. Supposedly nobody has seen The Cage, so they have to show all that footage and able to get the point across. So, I mean, I love that they're able to connect the two together, current and past, but I wish there was a way to have more of the ending, like the actors really doing a phenomenal job that they did in part 1. I just wish there was more of that. But I love the happy ending. Like, it was just very Disney-esque.
Fair enough. I also enjoyed the second part of The Menagerie, just like I enjoyed the first part. Again, adding of the context to The Cage with the subplot of Spock kidnapping Pike to bring him to Talos 4 to be able to live out a more fulfilling life, to have his female companion Vina. I'm assuming all of it, of course, leads to some questions that I've kind of peppered in throughout the episode. Again, for the mythology of Star Trek up to this point, the Talosians have been in isolation for 13 years. Starfleet has ordered under penalty of death that no one can visit Talos 4. The motivation for Starfleet is they don't want anyone to accidentally, quote unquote, rescue the Talosians or give them the ability to escape out into the rest of the universe with their illusionary powers.
But they did.
But they do. So then the Talosians have the ability to learn that Pike has been in this horrible accident, to pull on their heartstrings, if you believe that, to invite Pike to come be a guest and live out his life. They have the power to communicate with Spock with their illusionary powers, to tell Mr. Spock, please bring Pike to us so that we can be humane and allow him to live out his life. The Talosians have the ability to transmit these thoughts onto the view screen of the Enterprise to retell the events of The Cage 13 years prior, which only serves a purpose to explain to Kirk what happened, because the Talosians have the power to create this illusion of Commodore Mendez.
Exactly.
I guess one could argue the purpose of the transmissions as well, since they sent it out to Starbase 11 to the real Mendez, was to say, don't kill Spock and Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise. We're just trying to be nice, and we're trying to get Pike somewhere where he can be happy.
That makes sense.
But the whole point of the court-martial then becomes
Insignificant.
to make Kirk understand what is happening, not to convince a panel of Starfleet commanders not to kill Spock. Spock knows what happens on Talos 4. Pike knows what happens. Commodore Mendez knew what happened in the moment because he's an illusion. So it's just to explain to Kirk, this is why Spock betrayed you and commandeered the Enterprise.
So I wonder, just popped in my head, maybe they can only get their thoughts out to other alien type beings, because Spock is half human, half other being.
It's an interesting theory.
Perhaps.
And Vulcans certainly don't have, they're not telepathic. They're not like betazoids. We'll get
But
to
they're
betazoids.
able to, don't confuse me yet. But they're able to, the Vulcans, they can still do some kind of chit chat with the brain and body, right?
Well, through the Vulcan mind meld, but again, that's more meditative. I don't know.
I don't know. They both play with the brain.
It's interesting. Well, but then, okay, so then your theory, they can't communicate directly with humans, so they have to create these illusions, but they can communicate telepathically with other telepathic
I
aliens.
don't know.
Why couldn't they use their powers to convince a betazoid? Obviously, because the writers haven't invented the betazoids at this point.
Exactly.
I don't know. So, anyway,
In one of your little tips and fun facts, do
we
we
call them
learn?
tribble tidbits because you like tribbles.
In one of your tribble tidbits, do you explain why their little membranes on the aliens move? I thought that was awesome.
That would just be special effects.
Well, I loved it. I never realized that in the first time I watched it.
Yeah.
It's kind of creepy, but I liked it.
So, with that being said, and again, just looking at the time, I didn't think we would spend this much time on the Menagerie Part 2
It was fun.
for how much of a filler it was and how much we glossed over, or how much I planned to gloss over the narrative of the events of the cage. But anyway, let's jump into our tribble tidbits since you mentioned it. First airing
Yay.
November 24th, 1966. This is the only two-part episode in the original series. There's other two-part episodes in later series. Certainly some more memorable than others. I'll say that.
Well, this one we got to watch 2 shows in one.
Mentioning your comment to the Talosians all having T-Rex arms, the Talosians are all played by women.
That's awesome.
The voice of the Keeper was the same actor Malachi Throne. He's the same actor who plays Commodore Jose Mendez.
That's awesome.
You can be forgiven for not recognizing the voice of the Keeper as being the same because they speed up his voice when he does the voiceover for the Keeper. So it does sound a little bit different.
That makes a lot of sense. Awesome.
My only other tidbit, because we've covered so much of this episode with our coverage, our first episode when we did the cage, and then our tidbits from part 1. But to tie into the thought that I left dangling at the very end, again, in the original footage, in the original timeline of the cage, we get that shot at the very end of the Talosians created an illusion of Pike as a companion for Vina, and they comment on that as well. They mention not only are we going to return her beauty, we'll make sure that she lives out her life as happy, but we will also create a fake version of you to be her companion. All of that is left out of the Menagerie Part 2. It is shown at the very end to Kirk. When they show it, though, Spock has only taken Pike out of the room for a second or two. So the question becomes, how did Spock have enough time to get Pike in his wheelchair all the way to the transporter room, beam down to the surface where he can start living out his life? Are we as the viewer supposed to assume that even though on screen it's only 1 or 2 seconds, in reality, Kirk spends several minutes, 10, 15 minutes in the room by himself? Standing alone. It raises the question when the Talosians show Kirk that image at the very, very end of the episode. Is it real? Is it actually Captain Pike and Vina? Or did the Talosians make up that image to show Kirk? And if so, why? Are they showing Kirk that this is what we as a promise of what we're going to do for Captain Pike and in turn Vina? Is it the Talosians lying?
No.
So if you dig deeper into the story of what happens to Captain Pike after he returns to Talos 4, it's a happy ending, thankfully. I'll let you guys discover what happens on your own.
Do they make pretty babies?
I will let you discover on your own what happens. So I don't think the Talosians were lying for nefarious reasons. It's just a weird cut. And again, the Talosians are such an interesting alien species in Star Trek to me. The whole idea that they are isolated so that they don't get out into the universe, but they have the ability to reach beyond the planet that they live on to manipulate other things. They never seem to use their power for that purpose, even though they start as villains. It's just an interesting place to end the episode, showing Kirk this happily ever after image. We were doing exactly what we said, he's going to be our guest, but it's shown so quickly after Pike leaves the room that it potentially could be fake, and Kirk never picks up on it. Again, kind of a weird cliffhanger to end it on, but those are your Tribble tidbits.
So you're hinting that we're going to see them again, like we're seeing the gentleman from Mud's Woman?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I don't think we ever see the Talosians again in Star Trek. I think this episode absolutely leaves it in question in the minds of the viewer. If you don't accept the happy Disney ending and you put all of these other pieces in and you speculate, this could be a completely different ending for
true.
How things end.
Oh, nice.
So this is normally the part of our episode where we give the episode a ranking, where we assign a rank to the episode and pretend that it is a member of our fictitious starship for the season. We discussed it off camera going into this recording, and because we are short on time this week, we are going to give the same grade or the same rank to the episode for part 2 as we did for part 1. So for Jaci's USS Galactic Glitterbee, Jaci, you are giving it a...
The commander. I want them to be together, safe and sound.
Yep. So part 1 and part 2 are going to be commander level for Jaci for similar reasons. And for my starship, the USS Cosmic Shark, I give it 1 rank below a lieutenant commander. Again, identical ratings to the same as part 1 for similar reasons.
And we can change them around as needed, right?
Yep. As a reminder, we can promote or demote at any point during the season if we so choose to. And as a reminder to the listeners, we will post a visual representation of our rankings on our Patreon every Wednesday, the day after the episode goes live at patreon.com/treks and tangents. Just for comparison, the IMDb rating for the Menagerie Part 2, as of this recording, is an 8.1 out of 10, which is just 0.1 points lower than the Menagerie Part 1 at 8.2. So I think everyone...
the same idea.
I think everyone who watches this episode, Part 1, Part 2, you have the same opinion of both parts. You either love it or you hate it. There's not a big difference between the two. We'll be back next week to trek through another episode, but this is where we give our turbolift tease or elevator pitch to next episode's plot. This is where I'll give Jaci the title of the next episode, and Jaci, with no other information, will give a brief pitch to the plot. Jaci, next week's episode is entitled The Conscience of the King.
Okay. So we're going to leave the zoo, and we're going to go into a royal planet. And, of course, Captain Kirk is going to have to help the royals make the right decisions for their people. Don't be all about me, and think about the people that are serving you.
All right. Tune in next week to see how accurate Jaci's pitch is for the actual plot.
It's going to be a winner.
If you want more show information, you can find and directly support our podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/treks and tangents. We do have, as of this recording, our first episode of the animated detours posted on our Patreon for our crew members. That's where we do a dive into the animated series for Star Trek. The episodes over there are pretty similar to, I think, this week's episode, where we are less focused on the plot of the episode and we go off on a lot of different random thoughts. I liked this episode this week, so if you liked this structure, go check out the animated detours. Promise we'll be back next week with our more regular structured format.
Or maybe it'll be different.
Or maybe this will change the podcast forever moving forward. We shall see. But yes, thank you to those that do support us over at Patreon. We hope to see more people join us over there as well. Again, on our Patreon, we also post every week the updated rankings for the episodes that you hear on the podcast. You can also follow us on X at Treks_Tangents. We're also on Instagram and Blue Sky at Treks and Tangents. Jackie, where can people find you, and what are you up to?
Oh, my 2026 is already booming. I have Instagram, which you can find me as Jaboom, and I'll have music, fashion. I'm having a fantastic little countdown to my 20th anniversary of weight loss success. So, teaching how to dress for your size, dog training, all of that fun things, along with my music. So, if you need lessons, hit me up. And I have a Whatnot store, Glitter Bow Boutique, and that is all on the Instagram bio with all the links. I am looking forward to seeing you all there.
And you can watch me stream a variety of video games over at twitch.tv/PiratePoundTown. I seem to be most active Sundays in the afternoons and early evenings, trying to find in 2026 a more consistent schedule. Hopefully you join me. On YouTube, I post video games and other random content on my main channel, Pirate Pound Town. Coin collecting and hobby content can be found on my secondary channel, Pirate Treasure Hunting, whenever I have time to do that. I post socially on Blue Sky at Pirate Pound Town, and I'm trying to be more active on Instagram. You can find me there as Pineapple Cannibal. There's a story behind the name. Someday we'll get to it. Links to all social media mentioned can be found in the episode description. Thank you everyone for tuning in to this week's episode. We hope you had fun like we did, and we will see you all next week.
Don't be a mutiny. We'll see you later.
End transmission.